My name is John Murphy. We're yeah, all right.
I'll say when. Okay, let's do it.
So how and when did you first start making music? Can you say what drew you to it?
Well, I remember when I first started playing music when I was about 7, actually, in the suburb I grew up in, Melbourne, North Bourne.
Oops, stop. Ah.
Okay. How and when did you first start making music? Can you say what drew you to it?
Well, I'm not sure what drew me to it. It was an instinctive sort of thing, I suppose. Difficult to put into words. I just had to be involved in it somehow or other from a very early age. When I first came across music, I just became a whole world to me, I suppose. And I just always wanted to be involved, you know. I never really had a great desire to be. Well, there's other things I wanted to do, but I never had it was always central to my existence from, you know, the age of 4 or 5 almost, you know.
So when Chris is talking, he's
Look in this direction.
Yeah, all right.
right next to the camera, as close as you can.
Okay.
Well, do you want to start that again then? Do that?
Take 3.
Yeah. All right. Do you want to do that question again?
Okay, well, let's just do it again. I mean,
Yeah, just go over that or whatever. Okay.
start again?
Yep.
Okay. How and when did you first start making music? Can you
Well,
say what drew you to it initially?
Well, what drew me to it was something completely instinctive, I suppose. Hard to put into words. I just had to be involved. I just thought I just felt I had to, without really putting it into words or intellectually, I just had to be immersed in it completely from an early age onwards. From when I was at least 4 or 5, I can remember when the Beatles came to Australia and stuff, and I was just completely fascinated by that, and all the other 60s touring acts. I just wanted to be there, you know. And the first band I was ever in was when I was about 7, actually. A suburban outfit in North Bourne in Melbourne. The first proper group I played with was when I was 13, which lasted for nearly over 2 years. Yeah, I would have been 12 when I first was in it, but it started to get going at the end of 1972. I would have turned 13 by then. So, and yeah, I was drumming, and yeah, I just loved to do that. Basically, that was my whole desire for life.
What was mainstream music like at the time?
Well, that would depend on what time you're talking about. If we were talking about the mid to late 60s, it was all pretty innovative and chart-topping stuff, but still quite good pop. And
I think in this question it's 76.
all right, okay. Well, around that time in Melbourne, at least, and we'll say elsewhere in Australia, but Melbourne tended to be. What was popular was your Eagles singer-songwriter sort of music, and fairly bland MOR rock, AOR, adult-orientated American-style rock. And then there was still a bit of a glam influence in Melbourne because of the Skyhooks thing and stuff.
About Mandrakes.
Well, no, that was the teenage band I had. Yeah, that Mandrakes. That was 72 to 74. So back then it was more. Well, I remember there was a lot of glam rock on the radio and stuff. But 76, it had all gone into this sort of sub-Eagles singer-songwriter sort of stuff, and bland sort of music without any aggression and just dull, you know. And prog. Prog was okay, but there was a lot of prog rock, that is. Yeah, but that wasn't really that popular. That was more underground. But the popular mainstream music tended to be this bland singer-songwriter sort of stuff, which just didn't appeal to me in the least. Never did.
And who would you say were your early influences? Like, what were you listening to first off, and how did you get to hear or buy the records you wanted to hear?
Well, my early influences were, prog rock and progressive rock, and then I enjoyed glam rock, as I said before, 70s glam rock, and Bowie and Roxy Music and all that sort of thing. I got very into buying the English music press at an early age. I used to collect them from about mid-72 onwards, and collect the magazines that came over from Britain. You could get them in all the local newsagents in Melbourne. I mean, they were a few months old, but they were still relatively up to date. So I used to buy them, and then sometimes buy imported ones that were flown over a few days after they were released in London at the imported record stores all around Melbourne, which at that stage there was quite a few. So that's how I learned to discover my tastes and stuff, by going to those shops and also getting this English music press and buying the local music press as well. But that was largely to do with that, and just discovering krautrock and all that stuff along the way, So yeah.
And do you think there was anything particularly special about those times? We're talking about like the burgeoning punk scene in Melbourne around that time, or was it just because you were younger, or what do you think?
I think it's a combination of both. Myself, you were younger, and every time's wonderful when you're young. You think it's the springtime of life or whatever, and I do think there was. You could see there was much more of a shift in generational change than you see nowadays. Everyone's groovy and hip now, but back then there was quite specific divides, and you felt as if you were a new movement.
It's more like a scene.
Yes, more like a scene. You felt as if there was a definite movement, and that you were right at the centre of this hurricane, new movement locally, and you were honoured to be there. It wasn't the same as the way youth culture is nowadays. It was a lot more sort of differences between generations, and even people born a few years apart and stuff, which doesn't, at least here in Berlin, doesn't seem to be the same, and all over Europe and stuff now. So I felt the times were special, definitely. Yeah.
But what local bands were you in specifically, you can remember, and like what did you really connect with?
What local bands was I in?
Yeah.
Well, for the punk thing, I was in one of the earliest ones, the News, which was originally called Babies, but I got involved with them pretty early on. I mean, there was, let's just say, amongst that small scene of what the Melbourne punk new wave scene was, there was hardly any drummers of substance, and like we literally could take our pick from what bands we were in, and anyway, somehow or other I got involved with News, who were pretty much, along with the Boys Next Door, like almost the earliest Melbourne punk bands. There's a few others as well, but I was probably the youngest drummer playing with these groups at the time. But there wasn't many drummers at all involved.
So how did you actually meet them?
Yes, that's a bit of a question. I'm trying to remember that. Well, I actually answered an ad. I saw an ad in, I think it was Missing Link Records for News. It was still called the Babies at that time. Were desperate for a new drummer, and I knew they'd put out their own independent single, which I'd seen in a paper bag, And I gathered, well, before that I'd met Bruce Milne and various people. He had a fanzine, and anyway, yes, so I just saw this ad. I knew all these people were interconnected. I saw this ad and I just answered it and got hold of Gavin and, you know, had one audition and I was in, basically. I think, pretty much. I was in October or November of '77. They'd lost their last drummer literally a few days beforehand or something, and I just stepped into the ranks, you know.
And how did Wellyworld form?
Well, that formed originally around August, wait a minute, well, I'd met Ollie while playing in News, because Young Charlatans, his and Roland's band, often played on the same bill. And I'd met Ollie beginning of 1978, well, end of '77, and via Gavin Quinn of News's house. He was a friend with Ollie, and Ollie came around. I think the Young Charlatans had just come back from Sydney, and it sort of was sort of in hiatus. And anyway, yes, I used to see Ollie at all these shows that we jointly did at venues around Melbourne, and I was increasingly getting sick to death playing with News, because what they did was good, but it just wasn't quite up my musical alley. And also there was a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes, especially with their political aspirations and connections with the Socialist Workers' Party, that drove me a bit mad. So anyway, Ollie was interested in forming a new group, electronic punk thing. And after I came back from Sydney, and after that in August we started rehearsing together, and that's how it happened. And I think the lineup gelled in September of '78 or something. So yeah, that's how it came together. Yeah.
And what about the little band scene? How did that sort of come about, and what were the main venues you played at?
Well, that came about through the Primitive Calculators mainly. I mean, it was all these spin-off, their peer group and the spin-off acts. They put together these sort of small acts to last for a limited duration, just them and their peer group, and some or other. Wellyworld, we got friendly with them, and they were, eventually they ended up sharing, well, having two houses flat side by side in North Fitzroy. The other members, like Ollie and Lawton and stuff, the other members of Wellyworld and Primitive Calculators, lived next door, and the whole little band scene came out of that, basically. The peer groups, the people that hung around those places, and then they started playing various small venues around North Fitzroy, or around Fitzroy, the inner city, northern, occasionally sometimes south of the river, Yarra, that is.
It's very much to the north of the river.
Well, originally, yeah, but I gathered after I left Melbourne and expanded all over. But that's how it originally came about September.
1 second, sorry. The card's full.
There's no problem.
Yeah.
It's a shame, because I mean, this looks much better.
So that's full, is it?
That's
Yeah,
fine now. Okay,
yeah.
let's go.
Yeah, which venues?
If you can swear.
Well, there was one fairly close to where both bands lived, which I honestly can't remember the name of. I mean, it was quite a well-known venue, inner city venue. I just can't remember the name of it. Well, there was that one, but there was also yeah, the Exford. But there was one in particular that hosted a few of these events. That was on Nicholson Street, North Fitzroy. I just cannot remember the name I know it when I hear it, but it's just slipped my mind. I mean, we are talking about over 30 years ago. So, and they played the Exford, and then there was a venue on the corner of Nicholson Street and Gertrude Street. There's a venue there. We played doing little band stuff. A whole lot of little pubs around Melbourne, the northern side of Melbourne. But
And what sort of things do you think sort of united you with the other musicians, or what divided you as well?
well, which other musicians are these?
Mainly from that scene, from the little bands. What kind of brought you together in a way?
Well, I suppose it was just there was an energy level. People had a big energy level, and they wanted to do.
Stop.
Yeah, I'm sure it'll come to me when I,
But with the other musos at the time, I mean, the bands and the other people you were working with, what do you think actually brought you together?
well, just similar musical interests, I suppose, and attraction of personalities, and just a like-minded mindset, I suppose, and just a general aesthetic approach.
Which was?
Well, it was we wanted to express ourselves creatively, but we didn't want to do this mainstream music that it just didn't appeal to us, like from a musical aspect, but also from the whole visual aspect of. I mean, the whole new wave thing was very much a reaction against what was the constant, the current popular, mainstream popular thing, and we did not want to go down that. Well, we didn't. I mean, we wouldn't have minded success, but we didn't want to go down that mainstream route of Oz rock, which was essentially a battling cry against,
3XY charts and countdowns.
Yeah, pretty much. Just the powers that be dictated what was to be popular, and we didn't like what was, thrust at us from the mainstream. And I think that's why, like attracts like, and we all got together. And Whirlywall was a shared love of electronic music. I mean, really, that's what it came down to. And the whole little band thing was, I'd say, a shared love of sort of outrage and performance art and music, and doing something that's sort of fairly over the top, always put together, and fairly confrontational. It was Melbourne's equivalent of the no wave scene in New York in the late 70s, really, in many ways. So it was all that. It was a reaction reading about that sort of thing. And
Do you think it compared with Sydney?
I think Sydney was quite different, actually, at the time. That was still more traditional Detroit and punk orientated. I mean, there was a fair amount of punk still in Melbourne, but it was Melbourne was always considered more arty by people, which was a put down. But I think we were doing some pretty innovative things. But Sydney, I mean, there was that side to Sydney as well, but there was on the alternative scene there. It was more. Still more traditional, we'll say. More, yeah.
And what are your thoughts about the song Shivers, for example? Why do you think it was so popular at the time?
Well, I think it's like all peer groups and musical times, like, the psychedelic era and stuff. There's one song that seems to click with the people involved, and Shivers, I suppose, for a lot of people, commemorate.
was so popular in the sort of Melbourne scene at that time? Or
Well, I think it's a song that it summed up the whole, well, I won't say the whole era for everyone, but like the Crystal Ballroom era for people. I think that's why it resonates with a lot of people that were involved, who went there. I think that's the reason why. It's like an iconic theme for that time. Well, for Melbourne anyway, or for that particular St Kilda alternative scene. Not so much maybe the people across the river from the North Fitzroy one, but yeah, I think that's why it's like, you know, songs in other eras become like totems of that period, you know, like various songs from the psychedelic era and stuff, and even the glam era, various, and like I think for Shivers is one like that, for the Crystal Ballroom, well, late 70s alternative Melbourne scene. That's all I can. I mean, besides the fact that it's a very, you know, evocative number emotionally and stuff. I mean, you know, people. It's got a big cult following worldwide, you know, especially amongst people who, you know, in other countries. But I think, you know, for people who are in a particular place at a particular time, that's why it's so strongly felt, you know. Why?
well, as part of the zeitgeist.
Yes, yeah.
And it's a teenage angst dealt with in an ironic manner.
Yeah.
And how do you feel about the creativity of that whole time, like compared to these days?
Well, yeah, that's a difficult question to answer, but I would say there's probably still as much energy around as there was then, but it's far more dissipated now, you know. I mean, it's dissipated into lots of different forms of not just music, but loads of different things, you know, especially the computer revolution and stuff. Whereas there was more compact then, you know. There was probably there was a lot of energy then, but it's a lot now, but it's more widely spread out, you know. A lot of it was very full on, but then people burnt out quickly then, you know. So there isn't the same degree of self-destructive behaviour now as there was then, especially amongst people of the same age group, like people who are in their 20s and the late 70s seem to be far more self-destructive.
1 second.
Okay. Yeah. So back to the about the creativity of that era compared to now. How would you sort of sum that up?
I would say people were more prepared to possibly think out of the box, think out of the mainstream, weren't so concerned about how to fit things neatly into small little areas, that they were a bit more prepared to try things new, perhaps, and not feel that everything had been done before, you know. They were prepared to sort of, you know, try and fail and maybe go out on a limb and perhaps not so much worry about the commercial aspects of, as in the potential career or commercial or money-making aspects of what they were doing, and worrying about whether or not it'll fit into the right sort of area and stuff. They're a bit more prepared to expose themselves, I suppose, you know, or go out on a limb, yeah.
And you mentioned before just the idea of self-destructive, more intense.
Yeah, I think along with this higher energy burning came a more of a self-destructive tendency. People burnt out earlier and stuff. I'm comparing it to the people of the same age now as then, and they seem to be a bit more Well, it was arguably not quite as creative. They're a bit more intelligent about staying the course. They're not so. Don't romance the sort of the self-destructive aspects of artistic behaviour as much as what happened in the past, when a lot of people seemed to believe you had to be adult to do anything that was really their creativity.
And do you think that had much to do with the combination of drugs and creativity?
Yeah, I think there was a spiel put around an idea. The road to wisdom is the path of excess sort of thing, and yeah, I think that went hand in hand with the rock myth of the time, and that spell didn't get broken until possibly even the early 90s, really.
I mean, for a short-term burst of
Okay, let's go.
inspiration. Okay, so back to the subject of just drugs and creativity. You're just saying that.
Well, I think drugs and creativity can be fine partners for a short while, and then they somehow or other become the opposite. It becomes the opposite to creativity, because they burn you out, and well, for some people anyway. Some people may be able to continue on for a long time, the two going hand in hand, but it seems to me that after a reasonably short period, then they become like the antithesis to creativity, and but the allure of them is still very strong. So, and certainly in the late 70s, there was this whole, there was still this big thing about sort of substances and creativity going hand in hand to create new mind-blowing life forms in music and art and whatever. Yeah, so especially with the rock myth, the whole rock and roll thing, that didn't die until the early 90s probably. So yeah, it's not. I don't dispute it. I mean, I think for some it can be help a lot, but then you can get into dangerous waters. It can control you instead of you using it if you're not careful.
Also, what do you think the music from that era tried to capture or create something quite fairly special, or?
Well, yes, I
particularly from that scene.
Yeah, so.
I mean, at that time in Australia, would you say it was more frustrating or liberating?
I would say a combination of both, actually. Frustrating because you'd know that you could tell by what the music, the whole music scene in Melbourne, you'd get to a certain level and then you'd be banging your head against a.
Okay. Yeah, back to how Australia at that time, was it frustrating or liberating?
Well, I can only speak from the Melbourne aspect, but I would say it was a combination of both. It was like certain aspects were quite liberating. We knew we were doing quite innovative stuff, and there was quite a supportive peer group, and like things seemed to be getting better and better. But frustrating from the sense that you knew that you could only get to a certain level, and then you couldn't expand beyond it, just because of the way the whole Oz rock music industry was the way it worked then. Yeah, I mean, we're all very much in reaction to that whole thing, and as in we were quite anti it, and that's what I should have said before in the previous answers, that one of the things that held us together was our sort of I won't say hatred, but like semi-loathing for the Oz rock establishment. and what the way they did business and just the general way they ran things and stuff, and that was quite a binding thing for all the acts then, throughout the whole alternative thing. But certainly the little bands thing was extremely anti that thing, and they in turn thought we were beyond the pale. And yeah, in Australia, yeah, well, it was, you knew you could only get to a certain level of things, and that was frustrating in itself. You knew that if you wanted to keep on creating and going, well, you felt as if you had to get out after a while, and that was.
It was like a sort of shared sense that you'd never get anywhere.
Yeah.
Unless you kind of,
move back, it's okay.
Yeah. You had a shared, all the people involved, well, most of them, had a shared sense that you weren't really going to be successful out of this. You you had nothing to lose because you knew you weren't going to have anything to win, so or to gain. So, well, you felt as if you weren't. So, just do your darndest, free of commercial restraints and all that. And so, yeah, I mean, there was that frustration with being in Australia, but there was a liberation as well. So, but Whirly World in particular felt quite frustrated because we knew we could only get so far. So we had.
Shit.
I think we're going to have to forget about this camera. Unfortunately, it doesn't have just to keep myself.
I'm sure you had the same feeling with Once Upon a Time when you wanted.
And yeah, I mean, I think it was pretty much the same in the 80s as well.
Oh, yeah.
From when I was back there, it still is not really much different due to its demographic and cultural isolation. But also, how much would you say being young relates to the kind of music that you created then, and like if your tastes like changed in subsequent years?
Well, they've expanded, definitely. I still partially have the same taste. I think being young had a lot to do with it. You had all this energy to expend and you wanted to make a stamp quite quickly and say, here I am, whatever. And my musical and artistic tastes have just, I won't say have changed, they've just expanded, a lot more. I mean, I know a lot more now than I did then, so not as easy as to, like being young, many young people, I partially include myself, always have a lot of them have very determined and beliefs which goes hand in hand with being young and arrogance, and then somehow or other they often get shattered along when they're older, when they realise things aren't quite as simple as they may appear, and they have to reevaluate things. Viewpoints about things which, a lot of people seem to have definite viewpoints about things which at the time, because we were all young, we thought were correct, but like growing older and more mature age, we realise things aren't quite as what they seem, and so you have to go back and reevaluate things and have a good hard look at yourself sometimes, and then decide what new path to travel. So, and that's sort of essentially what happened to me, I suppose. So. But I think, being young young at that time, there was a lot happening in the alternative culture throughout the world and also in Melbourne, and we grasped what was going on, and we had a lot to say, and we were determined to say it quickly, and I think it all went into the music, and but yeah, now I take life a bit easier, yeah, so being,
Pace yourself.
yeah, pace myself, yeah, so.
And were there any particular people, like female or male, in the music scene at that time that you particularly admired, or unsung heroes, or people that stood out or never got any kind of recognition?
Yeah, well, what, you mean in Melbourne, or, right. Yeah, well, that's a difficult one. I mean, yeah, well, I mean, there's people I admired and stuff. Well, I always liked what Stuart Grant of the Primitive Calculators did, but I thought sometimes at that stage maybe he was a bit of his own worst enemy in regards to, he didn't realise how good they were, you know, and yeah, that can always be a problem. A lot of people in Melbourne who were doing great innovative things didn't seem to realise how actually good they were, and they were always comparing themselves over the cultural cringe aspect to overseas things, and sort of pushing themselves, demoting themselves and thinking they were second best, when in reality they were actually as good, if not better, than a lot of the stuff from elsewhere. And that's what I'd actually, but sometimes I discovered this actually when I went to Europe in 1980 and stuff, and saw firsthand various things. People I admired, like, well, I always admired Mari Hoy, for what she did. I mean, you know, I admired Ollie as well, yeah, but I can't think of, I can't really think of many others, you know. Ash Wednesday, yeah, people like that. You know, he always kept on going, and that was good. I admire the way he's kept on doing things and expanding, and yeah, I'd have to, I can't think of anyone else offhand, you know.
And what did you think about the film Dogs in Space? How well did you think it captured the times?
Yeah, I think it captured it reasonably well. Captured what, it was a 3-year period in 6 to 9 months or something for the film. I think he got the clothes fairly accurate of the imagery and stuff. You know, the house where it was filmed, all that stuff. Yeah, I think it did a reasonably good job, yeah. I think it worked, and I think it captured, even for people who weren't there, I think it actually conveyed it pretty well, and because I've been asked a lot about it.
I'll stop. No, move just slightly to the... Okay. And did you actually know Sam Sajafka? Can you describe him? What were your impressions of him?
Yes, I knew him, yeah. I think the film conveys it reasonably well. Now, I was here in Melbourne until early 80, and I remember him playing with Ears and stuff. They sometimes played on the same bill with Whirly World and the Little Bands thing. And yeah, I didn't know him that well, but I knew him, and then. I got to know him later in the mid to late 80s more, but I think it was a reasonable caricature by Michael Hutchins, yeah. Maybe slightly exaggerated. I know it caused him a lot of grief. Sam Sajafka, yeah. He wasn't entirely pleased with the whole thing, but I think Hutchins did a reasonably good job, pretty good job, yeah. And the whole scenario was reasonably pretty well reenacted, yeah.
And where do you think the film succeeded, and where do you think it kind of failed?
I think it succeeded in showing the atmosphere and the whole aesthetics, zeitgeist, whatever, of the times, you know, for that. I think it did reasonably well. The failures were possibly there was a few scenes I seem to recall that were cut out that I think should have been in the film, along with some soundtrack stuff. That's my only criticism, really.
Soundtrack-wise, it could have been better.
I would have liked to have, there was some stuff recorded that wasn't included. I would have liked to have seen included, yeah. Because when I was involved with the production of and the execution of the soundtrack quite heavily, and I just thought there was 2 songs I remember that weren't used that I would have liked to have seen on, but you know.
Which songs were they?
Well, one was a scene that was never filmed of a sort of one of the little bands, these young kids playing, and who some of them ended up in 80s Melbourne hardcore punk bands, but they were pretending to be an arty 5-piece punk band from the 70s, late sort of a little band's punk band, and that was a great song, and it was a pity it wasn't used. It was a noise feedback guitar sort of thing. And then there was another one by Too Fat to Fit Through the Door, which I remember. I'm not sure, I don't know if that was on it or not, to be honest. My memory's a bit hazy now, but I have a feeling it wasn't used. So, and there was one scene, yeah, I think was cut out because they didn't have finance. But overall, I thought it, you know, I think it, for a film, it did a reasonably accurate job, and I enjoyed it. Yeah, so I'm not really sure what else I can say about it, you know, since it's been a long time since I've seen it. So my various friends of mine in Europe have found it amusing, and I've been asked a lot of questions about it by various people, both in Europe and America when I've travelled there. So it's got quite a cult following throughout the world, yeah.
I remember at the time being a bit cynical about the idea of recreating a scene like on that short-term level, but
yeah,
when you look at it in retrospect, it works.
Yeah, I remember there was a lot of sort of cynicism and, I won't say negativity, but offhandedness about the film from people in Melbourne around the time it was being made. And yeah, a lot of guffawing and sort of people thinking, oh, you could never do a decent job. But I think he did a reasonably good job, you know, in retrospect, yeah. I mean, yeah, it wasn't 100% accurate, but I mean, I think it was reasonably good, you know. So yeah, I'm glad he made it anyway, yeah. And I enjoyed being involved with it, and being on the film set and the recording studios, so that was good.
Do you think Richard put very much sort of his interpretation of how the scene was?
Yeah, I'd say so, but I think he made that fairly obvious, you know, that it was his interpretation. So, you know, like, that will never be 100% with someone else's interpretation. So, yeah, I mean, he made it fairly obvious it was what he wrote the script and stuff. So, yeah, I presumed that, you know. But he did get a lot of input from others about the thing, but yeah, it was his interpretation, and you know, others may have had different memories of same events and stuff.
It's always like that with these.
Yeah, it is, unfortunately. So, you know, I think he did all right, you know.